All right, thank you everyone for joining us for this panel on rebuilding trust in climate finance. And thank you to the global or the blockchain global, the GBBC, for having us and organizing this event for us. So I'm Christine Lee. I'm the senior anchor at CoinDesk, which is a leading crypto media company. We are a data and events provider. And why don't we just go down the row and introduce ourselves?
All right, my name is Antti Vihavainen. I am the CEO and co-founder of Puro Earth. We are a carbon removal standard, and I'm happy to tell a little bit later what does it mean in practice.
Hi, my name is Alan Rantzell. I am the head of Filecoin Green from Filecoin, which is across the street at the church. And I work at Protocol Labs, and what we do at Filecoin Green are two different things. We focus on making sure that Filecoin itself is sustainable and uses renewable energy and all of that. And what this panel is really going to focus on, which is how can we use decentralized data and a lot of the tools for verification and trust building that we've developed in Web3 and apply them to problems in sustainability like carbon markets.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Javier Kinney, a Yurok tribal citizen of the Yurok tribe in Northern California. We are here at Davos again for three reasons. One is to help educate as well as promote indigenous inherent sovereignty, and based not only within the natural resources portfolio of the Yurok tribe, but also the objectives of the principles in working with technology and the development. But second, the cultural diplomacy as well, and engaging not only within the communities and individuals developing these technologies, but the capacity building. And third, and most importantly, the understanding and respect to have once we move forward within these trends and actually how to engage with either indigenous communities, tribal governments, or First Nations across the globe.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. All right, so we are seeing more corporations prioritize and take action on sustainability, on ways to improve their in the environment with their operations. From the Paris Agreement and regulatory developments, we're seeing the world come together and make this a priority. But we also have to acknowledge there is still inequality in the world. We do see a world in which the global north tends to be the consumer, whereas the global south tends to be the place where resources originate and are extracted. And so when we look at technologies like blockchain, how can they help in the narrative? And well, blockchain is a digital ledger. It's a single source of truth. It can make data systems more efficient, more transparent. And so how does that play a role in sustainability? And so let's kick it off by defining what climate finance is first, and perhaps you can start us off, maybe Antti. Sorry.
Well, I'm not sure if I'm the right person to sort of give a very comprehensive definition of climate finance, but so it takes different kinds of forms. I guess if you ask from the issuers of green bonds, everything can, everything can be categorized as green finance for as long as it is not building coal power plants. But in my books, it has something to do with the actual climate crisis and reversing that one way or the other. Of course, it can be sort of ecosystem restoration. It can be something that is very highly industrial, but that is drawing down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, which is the area that I personally represent. And something that is worth scaling, I guess, would be an aspect to add to that.
Alan, maybe you can jump in and add to that. What is climate finance, and how does blockchain intersect with that?
Sure. So fundamentally, climate finance is about how do you put money into things that we're going to need to do to decarbonize the world, right? And so green bonds is an example of that. Carbon markets that I think we're going to talk more about as a major example of that. Things like renewable energy, how do you finance that? And I think another piece of climate finance that we're very interested in is biodiversity and protecting nature. And how do you not just protect the atmosphere, which is an important component of having a sustainable society and a sustainable global society, but also how do you preserve the natural world and the biodiversity that comes with that?
Mm-hmm. Javier, what is the state of climate finance, and where do you see the challenges?
Thank you. I appreciate the question. I think the way the Yurok tribe has approached not only climate finance, but as we going from an extractive to a regenerative economies, we've got to be able to have one, sustainability, two, the ability and objectives to take action rather than just talk. But three, there's going to be people and places and assets, whether they're biodiversity, ecosystem services. So what we've really done is how are we going to set the trends in a principled fashion? We're not at the point of blockchain or cryptocurrency within our region or within our lands, but what we're doing right now is we're planning the purposes for that. So the Yurok tribe have always had a currency and exchange. It's always had the idea of what it is to sustain, whether it's food, water, health, the spiritual beings of who we are and why we are. So as we're entering these digital economies and these transcending aspects, we always want to make sure and take a step back. How is this going to connect and be a generational wealth? And are we benefiting? And if there is an extraction, how are we going to make that, as I mentioned before, not following the same history lessons that we've had? And so what you're doing right now is having not only professional, tribal, and non-tribal coders, programmers, engineers, but we're really trying to set that up to see how we're going to roll that out here over the next probably 5 years.
Maybe you can illustrate some of the projects you have in mind.
So first off, we were the first compliance carbon sequestration project in California. Initially, the state of California excluded tribes from that. My main objective is to purchase 1.5 million acres of our ancestral territory back. So as we're having both the conversations of having the infrastructure, broadband to even be able to be at the level that we're talking here, we want to set that planning preparation up. So not only the carbon markets, we're creating a tribal utility for our energy transition, but we're also, again, have about 8 business ventures, so we're part of industry as well. So those are the types of balancing and understandings of what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. We may not agree with some of the development that may be happening, but rather than put that money or investment into litigation, we're seeing how we can handle that in a diplomatic way. So we're learning from all of you here. We do want to thank Sandra and her team, not only for the inclusion, but again, pushing that conversation further.
Auntie, where should climate finance be directed to achieve the most effectiveness?
Well, yeah, and again, we could discuss what is effectiveness. We've, in our organization, Puro Earth, we've decided to focus on just, climate, and climate, is basically suffering from the excess CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. So we are sort of, we're saying that do no harm to anything else, but focus on the actual carbon sequestration, carbon removal. Humans are typically sort of have challenges in sort of multi-factor optimization. If you remember your sort of mathematics classes from high school, it's damn difficult compared to just single-factor optimization. So that's why we want to focus on that, there's a huge amount of innovation taking place over there. So we started out with 3 different carbon drawdown pathways back in 2019. Now there are 6 sort of meta-level methodologies, as we call them, sort of very broad sort of areas where carbon dioxide can be removed from the atmosphere, and innovations come in all the time, and it's wonderful to follow that. There is definitely no silver bullet for carbon removal. So what we need to do is harmonize the climate impact across these different methodologies and make them comparable. Make sure that the most efficient process gets most of the attention, while at the same time, of course, the promising processes and projects get funding in order to mature them to a scalable level.
And are these projects being applied right now? And are you seeing, like, what are the stats? What are the results?
Well, the projects are operational, so there are in our ecosystem we have 200 companies that have signed the platform agreement with us, which basically enables them to issue credits, and there's something like 70 companies that have actually issued already, which means that they have already been able to prove to independent third-party auditors that carbon has been removed for at least 100 years. We have two categories. One is more than 100 years, and the other one is more than 1,000 years. This year, we are going to issue credits for 4 more methodologies, which basically means that there's going to be a huge sort of expansion of supply in terms of volume and variety, but everything is still harmonized across these in terms of climate impact.
Alan, you're also looking at carbon projects, carbon bonds you mentioned. Why do you need a blockchain for this? How does it add value?
It's a great question. So coming back to what are all of the different things that we need to do for climate finance to successfully decarbonize? We need to do biomass-based carbon removals. We need to decarbonize the power grid. We need to build projects and things like data centers in a way that's efficient. And we need to protect the natural world, right? We need to do all of those things. Like you said, there's no one silver bullet specifically within carbon removals, and there's certainly no silver bullet, no single silver bullet within the broader space of decarbonization. And what that means is we need to verify that the actions that we are taking are actually effective. And that's where blockchain comes in. I think 2 panels ago, there was a discussion about the convergence of AI and blockchains. And it was said on that panel, I think, I don't understand how we could have verifiable AI without crypto-based tools. And so what we've been working on is taking data from many different sources, right? Filecoin is a decentralized storage network, so we work a lot on decentralized and verifiable data. Whenever you have, say, a carbon offset project or a renewable energy project, you're going to make some claim ultimately, right? That claim is going to be, this product is made with renewable energy, or this project sequestered or removed a certain amount of carbon. If you want to trace that claim and really make sure that that claim means something, that's not a simple task, right? And the tools that we have in a lot of registries are really sort of not up to that task. You have to trace through all of these PDFs. There may be missing information. It's very manual. It's very difficult to actually verify the end claim that's being made. And so what we've been working on is taking data from many different sources. So say, again, you have a carbon project. You may have the developer of that project and also a validator, a VVB from the registry. You may have satellite data. You may have data from many, many different sources. And they have different types of data provenance attached to them. We've been working on tools to take that, run it through a compute pipeline that ends up with that final claim, and always give you the tools to understand who provided the data, where did it come from, who wrote the actual code that linked that raw data to the claim, who ran the code, and how is all of this verified? So you can understand, based on who you trust, whether you trust that claim or not. And so that's maybe a little bit detailed, but that's the type of tooling that we've been developing in Filecoin Green in order to support carbon.
So is this being used? And if so, what regions are you deploying this technology?
Yeah, so it is, and it's been used in many different regions throughout the world. I think one of the things that we really like to highlight and focus on and try to push towards is supporting local and indigenous communities in projects that we do, because I believe indigenous people are 15% of the global population and protect 80% of nature's biodiversity. And so really, if we're going to fix the climate without wrecking the natural world, we really have to build tools that, follow the lead of indigenous people, right? And provide tools and let you guys use them how you want to. And so we work with a group called Gainforest that does a huge number of different projects, many of which are indigenous-led in Latin America. And they do things like monitoring biodiversity. They do things like auditing existing credits, so carbon credits that have been issued by an existing registry, they compare what the registry is claiming to satellite data and apply these sorts of data verification tools across a broad range of different projects.
Javier, so environmental and social issues are closely linked in the sense that in terms of environmental impact, it tends to disproportionately impact marginalized communities. And so how can we deploy climate finance in a way to achieve better environmental and economic equality?
No, that's great. What we look at is the empowering and uplifting, and again, rewriting the trends of where we're going to go by indigenous-led initiatives. I think climate finance, number one, includes who's going to pay for it and who's going to benefit from it. That there's simple concepts and principled approaches. There's now 2 Native American banks, one in the United States, specifically in California, one in the First Nations. Why is the climate finance not flowing through those types of institutions? Number one. Number two, how is that generation of revenue going to either be distributed, or how is that technology including or excluding indigenous peoples? So we have 2 initiatives right now. One, the most advanced LiDAR company on the West Coast is the Yurok tribe's Condor Aviation. So we're providing federal, state, local, and private industry with the data. So data sovereignty comes with that. So we believe the neutralized aspect of being able to talk exactly what you're talking about, how to disenfranchise people, we're looking at empowering them. And so that's one way. Secondly, we're working with the MIT with the Space-Enabled Research Prototype that lands that data within our hands. So again, the decision makings of not only carbon measurements, land, water, food, wildlife, people. So that's satellite imaging, as he's mentioning. We like to say and do what we say we're going to do. We're not going anywhere, right? We're likely going to be some of the communities that have been here since the beginning of time, and we're going to remain. So for investors, we're that type of verification. Third, and most importantly, the actual ground truthing on the ground. Who's the biologists? Who's the foresters? Who's the fisheries experts? But again, we have to have coders, programmers, pilots, all these computer-generated aspects. We need to have that capacity building. So as we're going along, we don't want to get left behind. We can actually lead, because in the climate finance, climate crisis space, there is no solutions without indigenous peoples.
Can I actually key off of that really quickly also, which is that a key reason that we think decentralized solutions are better for supporting these types of initiatives is that your data isn't locked inside of some large data company, like a Web2 company, right? That actually give people the ability to own their data, right? And decide what you do with it and how that plays out.
Well, if I may offer a controversial comment or two.
Go for it.
Now we're talking.
So first of all, you have to have the principles right to begin with. I think what you have both explained makes a lot of sense and sounds like you've got the sort of the principles right. The thing is, garbage in, garbage out. Blockchain doesn't make bad data better. So I think that's just good to note. We started out by defining what are the least disputable ways of removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, that's how we've left out certain areas deliberately because they are disputable, and only focused on the ones that we know will work, the ones that are measurable. They have a very little or small risk of re-release, and that are we know the permanence of those solutions. So that's one thing, and I seem to have forgotten the other one. I'll get back to that later.
We'll get to, but maybe you can respond, Alan. The data doesn't make the environment any better. So how do we make it actionable to make sustainability practice among corporations?
Right. So, and I think part of what you're highlighting is that if you do something like a bio-based carbon removal, you can take CO2 out of the atmosphere, store it in plant matter, and show that it's staying there, right? And so that's, from a physical perspective, that's really, really clear exactly what you're doing. And in something like a nature-based solution, if you try to protect a forest, right, you have to prove in order to issue a carbon offset that if you didn't do your project, then that forest would have been cut down. And so that's a huge issue. So that's called additionality. You also have to prove that your project didn't cause some unprotected forest to be cut down, which would not otherwise have been cut down. So that's called leakage. You also have to maintain that forest as long as the carbon would have been in the atmosphere. And so that's the like durability that you were talking about. And those are really serious issues. And when we talk about rebuilding trust in carbon markets, and you think about 2023, a huge amount of trust in carbon markets was decimated this last year. Especially, there was a Guardian article that came out during Davos last year in January, which highlighted some of the issues around additionality with many very well-known projects. And I certainly agree, right? Garbage in, garbage out. There's nothing sort of magical about blockchains that are going to make projects better, right? But what we can do is build better tools for highlighting those sorts of issues, right? And so when I was talking about the tooling that we're building to trace not just the data, but what you actually do to that data that leads to a claim, that is the sort of tooling that can interface really well with, for example, in the Guardian article, they had new ways of evaluating additionality. And they ran old projects through those new methodologies and showed that probably those projects actually they don't work that well, right? And so what we're doing is building the tooling to be more rigorous and be more comprehensive about how we evaluate these projects so that we can take the money, set aside for climate finance that we've been talking about this whole time and use it for things that are really effective and really matter.
I'll just add to that transparency in data also adds to accountability. And I'll take Bitcoin, for example. At Bitcoin, you can actually track how much energy consumption is in some cases around the world. And that has gained a lot of attention around the world around the energy, that proof of work, consensus mechanisms, how much energy that consumes. And so that has galvanized the Bitcoin industry to have more efficient energy consumption systems and look at renewable and sustainable energy use compared to, say, Amazon Web Services or Google and other tech companies that are consuming a lot of energy, but we don't know because they're private. So having the transparency of data out there does lend to accountability. But Javier, maybe you can jump into this debate. How does technology help, or is it indifferent to how we can encourage sustainability goals?
Well, first off, I wouldn't look at it as a debate. I think for the Yurok tribe, we're looking at it as a portfolio approach. So it's just not one variable. So our carbon projects and our carbon market finance mechanism is part of a more holistic approach for natural resources division and the healing of those lands and waters. So indigenous peoples, not only Yuroks, are disproportionately impacted by our lands. So when we talk about floods, tsunamis, fires, they're hitting indigenous communities and indigenous lands first and foremost. I think the other thing I would like to just advise is tribal communities or indigenous communities, because of the unique sovereignty aspects of our businesses and governments, are both the regulatory body as well as a market participant. And so as we're developing, again, whether it's carbon markets, whether it's other aspects within this space, we have to be ready to have those conversations.
All right. Auntie, you want to respond, a rebuttal, or if you will?
Well, yeah. So when we started out in 2018, when we had the idea of building a carbon standard for carbon removals, my first note or the word that came out of my mouth after we concluded on this was blockchain. Because it was 2018 and everything was supposed to be built on blockchain. But then we started looking into the challenge that we were trying to solve and realized that the primary challenge is not really the data when it's stored, but what is the data that goes into the process. And now today our registry is actually based on blockchain, but So it was just a matter of evolution, and we've come all the way this far with a centralized database that has a public sort of a view to it, and we've built it the same way as banks are building their systems. They haven't been really, the problems with carbon markets haven't really been about the data breaches or that the data would have been somehow faked or altered in the systems. It's just that, for example, the challenges that you described over there with some of these projects that were widely publicized during last year are related to the counterfactual baseline topic that, what would have happened. And these are the sort of the disputable things that make life a lot more difficult. And, with people who have genuine sort of willingness to do the right thing and really try to, figure out what is the best outcome for a project like that is just, difficult and debatable.
Well, for the Yurok tribe, I think you're looking at a voluntary space as well as a compliant space. So, people have their variations or perspectives of a gold standard. We understand what may be coming as the trend. What we like to do is, again, having the transparency aspect, but also the people aspect, right? Who's drafting the methodologies? Who's doing the baseline studies? Where is that math coming from? And how are we included or not? And again, that's just the sort of stock take that we take. Again, we're looking at it as a more of a portfolio approach, but we're also willing to help and assist and cooperate rather than fight, debate, and disagree, right? And I think as we go towards that humanity aspect, right, I think the celestial, terrestrial, and mycelium networks, how is that going to play into how we're going to be instituting these digital economies, number one, and these technologies?
And can I highlight another project that we work with, which ties into that, I think, really nicely, is called the Regen Network. And what the Regen Network does is allows a community to decide, of all the methodologies that are out there, which ones are the best for our situation, and issue carbon offsets based on that, or biodiversity credits based on that, and then connect those with a marketplace. And they make the data underlying that very transparent and easily available. And they take what I think is one of the, I'm curious why you decided to incorporate a blockchain into Puro now, and maybe that would be interesting to explore. But they allow you to scale some of these methodologies by allowing people to implement them, make them transparent, and then access a market, which I think is one of the other sort of major uses of cryptocurrencies, right? Is that you're able to develop a system that actually aligns incentives to scale something more quickly than you could in a more centralized way.
Answer: immutability.
Yep.
That's it.
All right. So, Ati, maybe you can weigh in on how should climate finance be deployed to better achieve goals set out by the Paris Agreement to slow down the warming of the climate and such, and how do we ensure that we measure these results in an effective way?
Well, first and foremost, emission reduction is what we all should do. Be it an individual, a company, a municipality, a country, a continent, whatever. In all scales, we are in the progress of doing, defossilization. I actually prefer that to decarbonization because carbon is actually quite necessary for all of us. So defossilization can happen, and I think it's also encouraging to note that there are people in many of our organizations who say that you can't do that without fossil. But it's been proven now in an increasing number of times that if you challenge that as a leader, that yes, we can. Let's just figure out how, and go further, go beyond the 5 whys. And just go to the roots of the causes why people say that you have to use fossil energy, and probably you'll figure out a way to avoid that. So that's of course number one. So and that is probably the most cost-efficient way to begin with, and only with that sort of a rigorous process and questioning, we can get to those sort of 85%, in some cases 90% emission reductions, and that the remaining the residual emissions then need to be just taken away every year, and then of course the challenge is that there's a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere already that is too much, so we need to draw down most of that as well part of that as well. So it's a lot of it's a huge infrastructure that we need to build. It is I have a tech background, and I guess most of the audience also has. So we've grown to believe that a kilobyte and a megabyte and a gigabyte and a terabyte, they all seem to fit into the same size of a box. As time progresses, you will have a hard drive and the capacity increases. Now that is unfortunately not true with physical stuff. A kiloton of CO2 is 41 truckloads of biochar, which is not an insignificant number of trucks, but still quite a lot of physical matter. But if you do that times 1,000, you get to a megaton, and that's already quite a lot of trucks, and that times 1,000 is it's just incomprehensible for you cannot get your head around how many trucks does that actually mean. How often would you need to have a truck leaving your factory in order to be able to get to gigaton? So let's say the task ahead of us to build the infrastructure that can support this kind of a thing is more than bits. It is about the trust, of course, the trust infrastructure that enables the money to be deployed, and therefore we can get these things moving. But it's just massive.
All right. So in building this infrastructure, how do we achieve interoperability and standardization, Alan, in building this technology and getting everyone in the same court here?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are many standards-setting bodies that are out there, and efforts like the IWA connected with GBBC to convert them or translate them into technology that we can actually work with and deploy. And so I think that what we really need to do is build this infrastructure that gives us end-to-end traceability, where we can actually go from an instrument like a carbon offset or a renewable energy credit or some other claim and translate that, see how that end claim is connected to the raw data underlying it. And that infrastructure can be built using our Web3 tools, but that's not how things are set up right now. And that's essentially what we need to build to enable interoperability and scale.
Javier, do you want to add to that and where you see interoperability and standardization?
No, we understand that, and we also understand the uniqueness aspects as well. But I do want to address just the trust that, when we come into Davos, it's a new learning experience. This is my second time here, and just making the connections as well as the understandings of really what's going on globally. I think one of the important aspects is the problem-solving aspects. That's what I trust, dropping in, being on the panelists, engineers, scientists, financiers, investors. I think what we really have to highlight is, number one, how we get there, right? And the way we get there is the forum. So Davos is one, COP is another. And, being a father of a daughter, that's the understanding, is how are we including those diverse perspectives, which may or may not happen. So I think we have to be mindful of that. Number two is the ability to have that problem-solving tactics and strategies across the board, not just in one specific area. So if we're going to, again, work with the global north, global south, Nordic countries across the board, that's the cooperation and partnerships that we're seeing, and invest in the same ways. So as long as we're doing the infrastructure, which we're building on the ground up, so we don't have the infrastructure currently. So what the Yurok tribe is trying to do is infuse that technology within the trends, so we don't have to come back. But we are also part of the largest dam removal project in the world right now. We're removing 4 dams for the purpose of bringing back historical fish runs. We're salmon people, we're prayer people, we're water people. So we have to apply that into how we're building the infrastructure in this digital economy. So offshore wind's coming as well, renewable energy. But if we put up these data servers, right, if it's going to cost more energy than to put in, those are the types of cost-benefit analysis we're looking at. But we need to do it across the board.
I hear the human element in your discussion here, Javier. So I wonder, where are we in the sentiment in that need an initiative to take action? Because we're in Davos right now, where the headline conversations are around Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky. There's increasing uncertainty, political climate and uncertainty, danger and risk out there. And so where are we when we talk about sustainability amid all of this pressure?
No, absolutely. And again, that's not new to indigenous peoples or tribal communities, right? Going through those genocidal sort of aspects. War is not new to us. The trauma and the generational sort of impacts of that. So I think what we have to do is come with the tools. How do you communicate? How do you negotiate? How do you accommodate? I think that's the human element. And for some reason, we've heard a lot about AI. No, I'm just kidding. But today, and through this week, it's here. But if you don't have that augmented human factor to it, I think that's where indigenous communities are going to look at that, reflect on that, and see how we're going to move forward. But we still need the infrastructure. We still need to be part of those communities and that sort of trends of building what's coming in that digital economy. And I think that climate finance is going to be key to that. And we want to be part of that solution rather than looking on the outside and finding it later.
I'm wondering if you could weigh in on the sentiment aspect of that. Are corporations, are governments interested in this amid all this talk of rising political conflict?
Yeah, I think a few different things come to mind. One is the concept of sovereignty, right, and giving people control over what happens in their area and with their data, right? And we can, enable that through a lot of Web3 tools and public verifiability. It's hard to do other ways. Another thing is that if you want to solve a lot of these political problems that we're seeing all around the world, not all of them, but many of them are connected to climate. All of them are connected to climate. Many of them, not all of them, are driven by climate, right? And so until we decarbonize, right, and until we protect nature, a lot of problems are going to grow in scope, right? So we really need to make this a high priority.
Auntie, do you want to weigh in on what you're hearing from governments, from countries, in terms of wanting to take action? And
I'm fairly confident. I'm seeing very principled corporations and governments that we interact with that are, yes, they've done their decisions and they are plowing ahead. Of course, getting new people on board may be slowed down because of these distractions. But that's a pity. Of course, I think we should understand that there are certain things that are really important, despite the disturbances in the economy and political schemes.
all right, with that, we're going to wrap it up. But thank you, gentlemen, for joining us for this conversation on climate finance.